Hey everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com and I'm a little bit of a tired boy. It's been an exhausting weekend of wrestling. There's been All Elite, there's been Evolve, there's been several New Japan G1 shows, and despite all of that, despite overdosing on wrestling, I actually wasn't sick of Extreme Rules. I thought it was a pretty decent show. Certainly one of WWE's stronger efforts, at least on the main roster, of 2019 so far. Do you agree? I guess we'll find out, but how do we know how strong a show it was exactly? Well, that's by assigning each individual segment a lovely individual grade. That's right, you know the drill by now. This is WWE Extreme Rules 2019 Graded. So we kick things off on the pre-show with a match that was announced, I think, just a few hours before the start of the show, really. Finn Bálor defending his IC Championship against Shinsuke Nakamura. And it was so weird to see these two guys do battle on the pre-show, given the fact that Finn Bálor and Shinsuke Nakamura are two men who a few years ago could easily have main evented a big New Japan pay-per-view, and may well have done. I don't know, I'm gonna have to fact check that. I don't know off the top of my head. Wasn't really watching New Japan at the time. Hashtag exposed. This was a pretty average match, or at least I thought it was an average match, just given the fact that Bálor and Nakamura are two men who could, I think, in my mind, put on a 5-star match given the right length of time and a build-up and a proper storyline and a really good feud and all that sort of thing. But they didn't have any of those to benefit them. They didn't have any of those foundations. They had, minimal build, not a lot of time to work with. So it's quite understandable why this match never really progressed into the higher gears. But Nakamura did pick up the victory with the Kinshasa after a nice closing sequence where momentum swung back and forwards between the two. And I was a little bit shocked by the title change, to be honest. I didn't think they'd switch the IC title around on the pre-show of a pay-per-view. Maybe you saw it coming. I certainly didn't. I'm going to give this a B-. It wasn't a brilliant match or anything, but it was perfectly serviceable. I enjoy the title change. It was just a little bit, not sloppy, that's the wrong word, but it didn't click quite as much as you might expect a match to between two men of such caliber. With that being said, though, I do want to reiterate that I am pleased with this title change. I think that it makes Nakamura relevant again, or at least it's nice to see him with the IC title around his waist. Maybe making him relevant again could be a bit of a stretch because holding that title hasn't really helped Bálor gain any sort of relevancy, but maybe losing it will propel him into a new storyline, or maybe this feud will continue on towards SummerSlam. Either way, a decent start to the pre-show, no fireworks or anything, but it was totally cool with me. Next up, the hometown boy and WWE Cruiserweight Champion Drew Gulak defending against the previous Cruiserweight Champion Tony Nese. The story being, of course, that Gulak didn't pin or submit Tony Nese in order to win the title. He actually pinned Akira Tozawa during a triple threat match. Like the previous match, I don't know if this one quite clicked. It was a bit more of a wrestling match, you know what I mean? It was a bit like Lesnar versus Angle, WrestleMania 19 kind of. Well, it wasn't quite on that level, but I thought Drew Gulak looked really good, whereas Tony Nese I thought was maybe a little bit off his game. I'm not sure if you thought that as well watching it, and I'm not trying to criticize or hate on Tony Nese or anything. I thought he, was a really good Cruiserweight champion, despite me not being too in favor of him winning the belt. I thought he turned in a series of really impressive and really slick performances. This wasn't one of his better efforts, nor was it, I guess, up to the standard that we're used to seeing from Cruiserweight title matches on pay-per-view, but it was still a decent match. Like the opening match, it wasn't anything special, but it got the job done. There were some pretty nifty exchanges, but there were also some things that didn't quite click with me, like Nese's weirdly contrived moonsault on the outside, on the apron kind of thing, and also a slightly botched 450 splash, which may have kind of hurt Drew Gulak, because I think Nese's knees went right into his gut. But no, Gulak picked up the win with the Cyclone Crash, and I enjoyed it a decent amount. I'm glad that Gulak kept the Cruiserweight Championship around his waist, and I'm going to give it a B-. Yeah, not, as I say, not up to the standard of some of the better 205 Live matches we've seen on pay-per-view, but nothing bad. It still gets a decent grade. Now on to the main show, and indeed one of the biggest matches of the night, the kickoff proceedings. It's our favourite tag team, we've all loved them for years and years, the Graveyard Dogs, Roman Reigns and The Undertaker, taking on the best in the world, Shane McMahon, and Drew McIntyre, his henchman, who is a better wrestler, but Shane's the best in the world, so we're not allowed to think that. This was, in the opening stages, like a regular TV tag match, but slowed down a little bit. But on the plus side, The Undertaker was moving a lot quicker than he was against Goldberg, moving a lot better. He just looked a lot better than he did against Goldberg in Saudi Arabia, and it was pretty relieving to see. The crowd even gave him a "You Still Got It" chant, which may be slightly patronising given that it's the bloody Undertaker, but I thought it was a nice gesture of goodwill, actually, and it was kind of heartwarming in a way. The match then moved into its next portion, I guess, after the opening exchanges, when Elias came out of the crowd and jumped The Undertaker just as he was about to last ride Shane through one of the announce tables. He shattered his guitar over Undertaker's back. Then Drew took out Roman Reigns with an excellent Claymore kick, sending Roman spilling into the timekeeper's area. And then for me, this was maybe the weakest bit of the match, where it sort of ground to a halt as the heels got heat on The Undertaker with Roman taken out of action. It was a little bit reminiscent of those Baron Corbin Raw matches, long beatdowns with Baron Corbin and his various rotating cast of henchmen all taking turns just to batter the babyfaces. But thankfully, it wasn't the full story of the match, and of course, the Graveyard Dogs, the best tag team in the universe, were able to make a comeback. It really picked up once Undertaker survived Shane dropping a huge elbow from the top rope through the announce table, and then a Van Terminator from across the ring into a trash can. Because it's The Undertaker, it wasn't too unrealistic to see him sit up. And from there on, the match was actually really fun, with Undertaker just dishing out punishment, everyone bumping and selling like crazy for him. And yeah, once again, it was a nice bit of redemption after that really bad and pretty sad match against Goldberg. There was also an excellent piece of camera work in the closing stages where Undertaker looked like he was firmly in control, but then Drew McIntyre rose up from behind him, and it was a really cool camera shot, and you saw Drew about to really take Undertaker's head off, and then there was a dodgy camera cut and we kind of missed it. But then Roman got in and intercepted Drew with a big spear from like halfway across the ring. But yeah, the initial shot of Undertaker with Drew lurking in the background was excellent, and I wonder if this leads to a feud between Taker and Drew, which wasn't really implied at all by the ending, but if it does, I wonder if that shot will be used extensively in hype packages and stuff. It certainly seemed tailor-made for that sort of thing. And then we got the finish that I think we all pretty much wanted to see. Shane McMahon isolated against The Undertaker and powerless to stop him from hitting the tombstone and picking up the clean pinfall victory. Thank God for that. The Graveyard Dogs once again sit on their throne as the best tag team in the world. Not the Young Bucks, not the Lucha Brothers, not the Usos, not the New Day, not the Revival, but the Graveyard Dogs, established 1991. Best tag team in the galaxy. I was originally going to give this a B, but I'm going to bump it up to a B+, just because it was such a relief and so nice to see Undertaker do his thing once again. And yeah, this match was better than I expected it to be, and also it did everything required of it. It was like a less spectacular version of that excellent WrestleMania match with Triple H, Stephanie, Kurt Angle and Ronda Rousey, where it's an odd assortment of wrestlers going against each other, but it hits all the key storyline beats that you want it to. Yeah, of course, this match wasn't a patch on that excellent match, but at the same time, it did everything that was asked of it, and it did it with minimal Shane McMahon-related bullshit complications. Next up, the Raw Tag Team Championship match pitting the champions, the Revival, against the challengers, the Usos. Now, I'm normally pretty good, right, at ignoring bad commentary. I don't often let commentary take me out of a match, but in rare circumstances, sometimes I do get distracted by bad commentary, and I really wasn't a fan of both Corey and Renee in this one. They were bickering way too much for me in this match. I don't think it was necessarily their fault. I think they were probably encouraged to really push this plot point where Renee was annoyed at the Revival for living more lavishly now that they're Raw Tag Team Champions, because they earn more money, because they're the champions, they've got more power, all that sort of thing, which is, you know, a nice continuation of the implied universe of WWE, but at the same time, I don't understand what her issue was with them spending more money, because they've got more money. It was a weird one. And when Corey was defending them, I found myself more on his side. And with commentary, you never really want to be on the heel commentator's side of things and find the babyface commentator to be a little bit silly or annoying. But that's exactly what happened here. And again, I don't think that's either Corey or Renee's fault. It was the fault of, I guess, whoever's decision it was to really push this part of the angle. The match was really good though. I was particularly impressed with the Revival. They're one of my favourite tag teams, and it was exactly for reasons that were demonstrated in this match. Slick heel tactics to distract the referee, blind tags all over the place, excellent teamwork, communicating with each other as well. I think there was one point where, I can't remember which way around it was, but either Dash or Dawson said to the other, like, hold him, as they went outside the ring to get on the apron because, you know, their opponent may have scampered across the ring and made the tag. And it's just things like that that make wrestling seem a lot more real and a lot more convincing than maybe in other matches. I really enjoy what the Revival bring to the table, and the Usos wrestled well too. This was I think, a pretty high-level match. and one of the better ones on the show. It didn't go too long, however. It never really kicked into that very high gear we'd like to see from a team such as the Revival or indeed the Usos, but the Revival retained their titles with a really nice shatter machine after a sneaky blind tag towards the end, and I think that was the right decision. I'm not ready yet to see the Revival give up those tag titles. I hope that, you know, they continue to have good matches or opportunities to put on good matches, and I have no major complaints at all, really. This gets a B+. I feel like maybe they were aiming for something a little bit more epic, a little bit more NXT TakeOver style, but after the Undertaker's appearance, the crowd were a little bit burnt out for this, and sometimes you can try and take the crowd response out of the equation, but often, especially on pay-per-views, they can really enhance, or in this case, detract from a match. So I'd love to give this a grade in the A bracket, but it only gets a B+ from me. Next up, a match that many of us were looking forward to between two very, very underutilized superstars, Aleister Black versus Cesaro. This was an absolutely excellent match between two excellent wrestlers. I would have loved to have seen it get a bit more time, but I guess, you know, there was a lot of things to squeeze into the show. But yeah, if any match could have been given a little bit more time, I would have loved for it to have been this one. They still packed in loads of good stuff into the limited slot they were given, but it's Cesaro and Aleister Black. Let them go 20 minutes. They'll absolutely kill it. The crowd were, again, still kind of recovering from their earlier deflation in this match. I'd have loved for them to have been really loud and raucous for it. There was a smattering of a "This is awesome" chant at one stage, but they never really got on board as they probably should have done. Still, Aleister Black and Cesaro both performed really, really well. Cesaro is such a boss. Like, Black got the victory, as we'll see in just a second, but Cesaro was just wrestling out of his mind, reminding us all that pound for pound he is one of the best wrestlers in the world. But just because I loved his performance, that doesn't necessarily mean that I think Cesaro should have won this match. In fact, I'm pleased that he lost, because I think that Aleister Black has more to gain right now from picking up a victory in this rivalry. He did so with the Black Mass after a nice exchange of strikes, and it was just wrestling. It was good wrestling between two excellent wrestlers, and it was potentially, I think, it was probably my favourite match of the night. This gets an A- with a proper crowd and a slightly longer time slot. We could have been looking at an A or maybe even an A+, but it gets an A-, which I think is a fair grade. And also, I came with a little theory while I was watching this, that I'd just love for Cesaro to win the Royal Rumble. We always say every year, wouldn't it be great if a mid-carder won the Rumble just out of nowhere? And I think Cesaro would be the perfect candidate. Chuck him in at number 5 or something, have him survive throughout the Rumble, and then the crowd, by the time he got to the final 4 or 3, would just be fully behind him. I have no doubts about that. Let's do it. Come on. That would instantly make a star out of one of the men on the roster who deserves to be a star more than like anyone else I can think of. Next up, the SmackDown Women's Championship match between Bayley and the team of Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross. This was a handicap match, of course, with both Alexa and Nikki promising that if they won, they would become co-SmackDown Women's Champions. This match was a weird one because I think maybe I was guilty of building it up too much in my mind to include shenanigans of some sort. Maybe we'd see Sasha Banks return and help out Bayley, or maybe we'd see Alexa take advantage of Nikki's naivety and basically betray her and just pick up the sole victory for herself, or maybe even the other way around. We'd see that Nikki was the one manipulating the situation all along and that she'd fooled Alexa and then she'd take the belt and run for the hills. But instead, things just unfolded in a very standard fashion. Yeah, this was what you'd pretty much expect from any handicap match. This was like the handicap match template, with the heels dominating early on, using the numbers game, and then the babyface fighting her way back into it, Bayley in this instance, and overcoming the odds to pick up the squeaky clean victory. There were one or two little spots that I liked that I hadn't really seen before, such as Bayley slapping a simultaneous submission on both Alexa and Nikki. I think one of them was even a Banks statement, maybe a little nod to Sasha Banks. We didn't see Sasha, by the way. She's probably still over in Japan, like having a great time with like Marufuji or Satomura or somebody, you know. She's living her indie dream. Bayley picked up the victory with the elbow drop on Nikki Cross, and Alexa didn't show frustration towards Nikki afterwards. She showed frustration at having lost the match. She looked really upset, as did Nikki, but she didn't direct any of that attention towards her best friend, which again is making me think, is their friendship legit? Is this storyline going to take a strange path that we just didn't expect it to? But yeah, the long and short of it is that Bayley retained the championship totally clean, and I'm going to give it a C+. One of the weaker matches on the show, but at the same time, it wasn't a bad match. There were no bad matches on this show, actually. Next up, oh my god, Braun Strowman versus Bobby Lashley in last man standing action. Emphasis on the word man. I love being a bloody bloke, I do, don't you? Unless you're a girl watching this, but this match wasn't for you. This was for men. I'm joking, of course, but my God, the testosterone in this match was absolutely off the charts. This was just two large men battering each other around the arena. They went out the back, they went to the concessions area. There was a terrifying spot where Braun Strowman suplexed Lashley into the merch board with the t-shirt designs on it, and I was certain that Lashley was going to just fall vertically down and land right on his head, but he didn't. He managed to turn to the side. It was terrifying. There was the bit where they launched one another over the row of like foreign announce tables, and I think Funaki took a bump falling off his chair. Well done, Funaki, mate. Getting involved. SmackDown's #1 announcer, come on. No one even jumped in to help. I'd have loved to have seen maybe like the Chinese announce team or the Hindi announce team stand up for their international colleagues and really batter Braun Strowman and Bobby Lashley. What am I talking about here? It was reminiscent actually of the Miz and Shane's match at WrestleMania this year. It wasn't as good as that match, which I think was a little sleeper hit at WrestleMania. I loved that match, even though Shane won. But this match wasn't quite on that level, but it certainly carried elements of that Shane versus Miz bout, especially the finish with Strowman slamming Lashley into an area, I don't even know what it was. They got up into the crowd and then Strowman hit the power slam on Lashley down a level into, it's like the pit from Robot Wars almost, but no smoke came up. And you didn't have Jonathan Pierce screaming down the headset, as he often did. The voice of my childhood, the loud, traumatic voice of my childhood, Jonathan Pierce. And then John Cohen started making the count, but he couldn't. This was a bit of a logical flaw in my mind, but he started making the count despite not being able to see Lashley or Strowman because they were in this weird enclosed area. He started making the count anyway. Renee flagged up the mistake on commentary. Cole scrambled to cover for her. But in the middle of his count, Strowman burst through the side, like the wall of the weird container they were in. And I thought that was a pretty decent finish, to be honest. It was quite enjoyable, despite the slight logical flaw, as I say, of the referee not actually being able to see them. But as soon as Strowman burst through the wall, he was clearly on his feet. Lashley was clearly still prone behind him. And it was a decent finish to a decent match. It didn't quite have the fireworks of the spot on Raw where they tumbled through the back of the set together, but it was still all action and something a little bit different on a show, and that's always nice to see in a long pay-per-view. I'm going to give this a B+. It was genuinely very fun. It was just two large men battering each other. What more can you ask for? I love being a bloke. I'm going to lift some weights after this. I'm not. I'm not going to do. I'm going to go to bed. Next up, the SmackDown Tag Team title match featuring the champions Daniel Bryan and Rowan defending against Heavy Machinery and The New Day, Xavier Woods and Big E, of course, because the WWE champion Kofi Kingston had his own business to take care of later on. In fact, it's not even like, I don't think the New Day even do the Freebird thing anymore. It's just in the tag division, it's Xavier and Big E, isn't it? Yes, pretty certain of that. This was a really, really fun match in my opinion. Everyone had their little chance to shine. Heavy Machinery had some spots that made them look really good and showed off their freakish combination of size and athleticism. Rowan had a few spots to shine as well. He was always bringing his unique size into the equation. Daniel Bryan, of course, was brilliant because it's Daniel Bryan. We just know that he's going to be excellent no matter which match he's placed into on the card. But the real stars of the show, especially down the stretch, were the New Day. Specifically, actually, Big E. Yeah, Big E was absolutely fantastic here, dragging himself by one leg out of a submission under the ropes when Bryan had him all tied up like Zack Sabre Jr. And then Big E just fired up, and it was great to see Bryan slapping him in the face and Big E just going, come on, hit me again. And then the finish was absolutely excellent. It had such a high degree of difficulty, but they absolutely nailed it, with Bryan going for his thing he does where he steps up onto the turnbuckle and backflips off, but Big E took a step back and caught him in perfect position to tag Xavier and nail him with the up, down, down. And now the New Day, after picking up the pinfall, are 6-time, I believe, WWE, you know what they do. They're 6-time tag champs. Pretty amazing stuff. Now, I'm not sure, I really racked my brain over what grade to give this match because I gave the Last Man Standing match a B+, but I enjoyed this match a little bit more. I gave the Black vs Cesaro match an A-, but I enjoyed this match a little bit less, so it was somewhere between the two for me. I'm going to be a little bit cheeky, a little bit cheap, and just lump in the following Paul Heyman segment, and that was really good. So I'm going to boost it up to an A- grade. This match and the little Paul Heyman bit afterwards combine to make a delicious A-. Basically, if you haven't seen it, Paul Heyman grabbed the microphone from the New Day when they were celebrating with Kofi backstage, strode immediately out through Gorilla into the arena and cut a rehash of the promo that he did on Raw, but it was still captivating because it's Paul bloody Heyman. He promised that Brock Lesnar was going to cash in tonight. That was our spoiler, but then he said, or Am I just messing with you? Because I'm Paul Heyman. Threw the mic down. Huge reception for Paul, of course, with the show taking place in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He said, in fact, I am Philadelphia. I am Extreme. It was really cool to see, especially after he appeared as well at the Evolve show the previous night. Next up, the US Championship match between the champion Ricochet and the challenger AJ Styles, accompanied, of course, by his new old new allies, the Club. Gallows and Anderson, they've been friends for ages. This was another match that was good, one of the stronger matches of the night again, but at the same time the crowd were a little bit exhausted for this match. That's always the problem with these long pay-per-views. There's always going to be natural peaks and troughs, no matter how consistent your show is. But it was given quite a decent amount of time. Ricochet was built up as the underdog babyface champion because he was beaten down by Gallows and Anderson before the bell had even rung. Then they progressed from, quick exchanges to AJ grinding down Ricochet, Ricochet making his comeback, and then they moved on into the finish. I've just described the basic template of a wrestling match. You all know this. You know this is how it works. But it was good. There were some nifty counters. There were some great displays of athleticism as well, especially towards the end when Ricochet hit an awesome shooting star press, but then AJ Styles had his foot under the ropes. And it was a little bit confusing, actually, because Carl Anderson pointed this out to the referee on the outside, and everyone acted like it was outrageous. But really, he was just being a good... He wasn't cheating, he wasn't doing anything heelish, he was just being a good friend to AJ and pointing out that the referee was about to make a mistake. I don't see too much of a problem with that. Anderson then did do something heelish, looking to take out Ricochet on the apron, even though if he touched him, then he would have ruined his mate's chances of winning the title because he'd have been DQ'd, but whatever. Ricochet managed to fight off Anderson, but then he was pushed by Gallows while he was on the top rope, setting up for the 630, and he was just like hanging there, and that led up to AJ hitting him with a nice Styles clash from the second rope backwards into the ring and picking up the pinfall victory, and now AJ Styles is the new United States champion. I'm gonna give it a B+. Yeah, I mean, it was a good match, it was a strong match, which we all knew it would be. We expected it to be, given the fact that it was AJ Styles and Ricochet, two of the best in the game right now. But at the same time, it was one of those matches where I was never going to be satisfied with the winner because neither man could really afford to lose. We didn't want to see Ricochet lose the title so soon after winning it, but we also didn't want to see AJ lose his first big pay-per-view match after turning heel. So WWE had kind of booked themselves into a corner here. I'm assuming, or maybe hoping, that this feud's going to carry on and we'll get a big rematch at SummerSlam. But I don't know. There was no indication of where this is really going to go for now. Next up, a match that I think was added during the pre-show, which made us all go, oh no, an extra match on this pay-per-view already full of matches. I think the eventual total of matches was 12 maybe? But anyway, it wasn't actually a bad thing at all. Kevin Owens versus Dolph Ziggler. We were all kind of secretly hoping and predicting that this was going to be a squash match as soon as it was announced, and guess what? Our prayers were answered and it actually bloody was. Dolph Ziggler started by slapping Kevin Owens across the face, and Kevin Owens just dropped him with a stunner and pinned him, and then cut a promo calling out Shane McMahon and saying, you can kiss my ass, I'm glad the Undertaker killed you earlier on in the night, and I'm Kevin Owens, I'm your new actual hero, and everyone loved him. A-. I mean, it was a squash match, but it was one of the best squash matches I've ever seen. A- is a fair grade, I think, for this, despite it taking seconds, just because it was exactly what it needed to be. Poor Dolph Ziggler, but fair play to him for doing the job, brother. And Kevin Owens right now has all the momentum he needs to be the top babyface in the company. Loved it. No complaints at all. Next up, the WWE Championship match between the champion Kofi Kingston and the challenger Samoa Joe. This was another fairly strong match on a card that was proving to be pretty consistent. It wasn't like every single match was blow away excellent like some of the takeovers. It was more like every single match was good to very good, if that makes sense. One drawback, I guess, was the result, which a lot of people had issue with online. I'll go into my thoughts about that when I give the overall grade, but the in-ring work was pretty good. Kofi and Joe are both excellent. Joe was working the hand quite a lot, which was good to see, and Kofi sold it really consistently throughout the match. But I think what was better than the in-ring work was the character work of both men, with Joe, as always, in the vast majority of his matches, playing an excellent, despicable heel, and Kofi, like he does in the majority of his matches, playing a great babyface, keen to get the crowd on his side and use their energy and, help it power him through the match and all the rest of it. This was a good matchup of personalities as much as it was a good matchup in the ring. I didn't mind the finish too much, or maybe as much as other people did, just because of its sudden nature, I guess. Kofi went for the Trouble in Paradise, but Joe countered into a clutch attempt. Kofi tried to do the Bret reversal, the Bret Hart reversal, walking up the turnbuckles, but Joe slammed him down. This all led to Kofi hitting a Trouble in Paradise almost out of nowhere and picking up kind of a flash knockout pinfall. It was a little bit quick, but at the same time, I don't really have too many issues with Kofi being portrayed as a strong fighting champion. On the other hand, I do have issues with how often Samoa Joe loses. As for the grade, I'm going to give it, taking all that into account, I'm going to give it a B. I enjoyed it as a spectacle and as a match, but I do understand the frustration with Joe once again losing a crucial match, which has almost been the story of his main roster career. In fact, I suspect many of you would want me to give it a lower grade than a B, but you know what, it was one of those swings and roundabout situations where yes, Joe's been made to look like a little bit of a soft touch, a little bit of a loser once again, whereas on the other hand, it really did help Kofi and helped galvanize his title reign. I wouldn't be against seeing Samoa Joe take the title off him in the months or maybe weeks to come, but I think for now it was maybe important to give Kofi a good strong victory, even if that did harm Joe. If that had happened and it was a weak match, I'd probably hammer this with the grade and say it was terrible, but because it was quite a strong one in the ring, yeah, I'm going to stick with my B grade. And finally, the main event, Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch in a winners take all match, a mixed tag match, a Extreme Rules match. So many stipulations to this one, against Baron Corbin and Lacey Evans for both the Universal and Raw Women's Championships. I actually enjoyed this match way more than I thought I would. I thought we'd see just an extended beatdown of Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch, with maybe one of them being isolated for a large portion of the match, and then both heels working over presumably Rollins, I guess, in the middle of the ring. There were little stages where that was the case, like when Baron and Lacey both took kendo sticks to his back, but it didn't dominate the match. There were some good periods of babyface offense as well. The main one that sticks out in my mind is when Becky did her leg drop off either the apron or midway up the turnbuckles to the outside through Lacey on a table, while Seth was up on the ring post, or like on the very top, and hit a huge frog splash on Baron Corbin simultaneously. That was a really cool spot. There were some cool little moments. I described it on Twitter as wrestling co-op mode, because it was kind of strange to see Seth and Becky figure out a way to work together without it turning into a tornado tag where everyone attacks everybody. And yeah, I did enjoy this way more than I thought I would, as I say. It had a novel finish as well, with Baron Corbin just getting sick of this and blasting Becky with the end of days. Becky sold it wonderfully, rolled outside the ring and was just so in pain, and that obviously led to Seth Rollins just snapping, and just Lacey Evans headed for the back. She was like, I'm not sticking around for Seth Rollins to murder my tag partner, I'm off, see you later. And Rollins hit, I think, 3 curb stomps, pinned Baron Corbin. He was furious. He also, before the curb stomps, beat him until the kendo stick broke. It was a really vicious attack by Rollins. He's always at his most captivating when he's at his most desperate, I think, whether as a heel or as a babyface. And then, of course, as I'm sure you're aware by now, the action wasn't over. Brock Lesnar's music hit. Paul Heyman came out, followed by Lesnar. It wasn't a lie. Lesnar was indeed cashing in his briefcase at Extreme Rules. And it was pretty straightforward. Lesnar cashed in, hit one F5 and picked up the victory. He hit a couple of Germans before the bell as well, but there was no way Seth Rollins was going to kick out, especially after going through a grueling Extreme Rules match. And now Brock Lesnar is the new Universal Champion. Ooh, don't know what to make of that, really. I'm going to give this on the whole, and I thought about this a lot, I'm going to give this a B as well. The match was better than I expected and was probably actually more in the B+ region, but at the same time, I just don't yet know what to make of it. It's hard to give this a grade when there's so many potential permutations that could play out on Raw. The thing that I'm worried about is this leading to a sort of lovers tiff angle between Seth and Becky, with Seth saying something along the lines of I lost my focus because you were there, and that led to Brock Lesnar getting the jump on me. Or maybe Becky, chastising Seth for losing his title while she's kept hers, or maybe jealousy from Seth because she's kept her title while he's lost his. I don't really know how it's going to play out, but I am nervous about it, definitely. And I'm also nervous about the prospect of Brock Lesnar once again being Universal Champion. When is someone going to take that belt off him? Are we going to go back to the era of an absentee top champion on Raw? I don't really know, and because of all that worry and lingering doubt, I can't give this higher than a B grade. But as I mentioned, the match itself was way better than I expected it to be. So now all that's left to do is give my overall grade for Extreme Rules. As I said in the introduction, one of, if not the best WWE main roster pay-per-view of 2019. It wasn't blow away awesome or anything, but it was very consistent all the way through. Yes, it was a touch too long, as every major company's pay-per-view seem to be these days, but despite that, the action was consistently pretty high. I really enjoyed Aleister Black versus Cesaro, enjoyed the Last Man Standing match too. I enjoyed the main event for what it was. I enjoyed the Undertaker match for what it was. Yeah, the worst match wasn't even a bad match. It was just that pretty straightforward and bland handicap match between Bayley, Alexa and Nikki. And if that's the worst thing on the card, then you're doing pretty well. I'm going to give Extreme Rules a B+. Your mileage may vary. You might even want to give it an A- or something like that. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. But for now, my official grade for Extreme Rules 2019 is a B+. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch up with Monday Night Raw soon. Thanks very much for watching, and let us know what you think in the comments section down below. You can follow Cultaholic on Twitter at Cultaholic and on Facebook at facebook.com/Cultaholic. If you enjoy what we do, then please do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Cultaholic, where you can pledge. And don't forget, of course, most importantly of all, to hit subscribe and to join us.